A convicted killer who survived a botched execution is trying to avoid setting a date for a second attempt at lethal injection. Romell Broom was sentenced to die for abducting and raping and then killing a 14-year-old Cleveland girl back in 1984. His execution was stopped after 2 hours in 2009 after executioners couldn't find a suitable vein for the lethal injection. They tried 18 times to insert needles. The state says that Broom stalled long enough, but his attorneys say that he still has important appeals pending, and they are against setting a new execution date.
On September 15, 2009, at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility, death row inmate Romell Broom, convicted for the 1984 abduction, rape, and murder of 14-year-old Trina Middleton, made his way into American history in a dramatic fashion. For 2 long hours, the execution team was unable to find a suitable vein to administer the lethal injection, causing the execution to fail. Romell Broom became the first person to survive an execution attempt by this method. The incident sparked an 11-year legal battle over whether a second execution attempt would constitute cruel and unusual punishment. In the end, fate decided his destiny. In an unexpected way, Romell Broom died of COVID-19 in late 2020, before the state could carry out a second execution attempt. Today we will delve into the last meal and the case developments of Romell Broom. 2 hours. That's how long the executioners tried to find a vein in Romell Broom's body to administer the lethal drugs. And his final words before leaving the execution chamber will send a shiver down your spine. "I will be back." But no one expected that death would come to him in a completely different way. For 25 years on death row, Romell Broom became a symbol of the death penalty controversy, the first man in American history to survive a failed execution. September 15, 2009. After 25 years in prison at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility, Romell Broom endured 2 hours of torment in the execution chamber. But death did not come. Instead, he was returned to death row with an unprecedented legal question: would attempting to execute him again be a cruel and unusual punishment? From a fatherless child in Michigan to a serial killer in Ohio, a botched execution that shocked the public, a second execution scheduled 11 years later, and an unexpected death from COVID-19 that ended it all. The content contains elements of violence and true crime. Viewer discretion is advised. On September 21, 1984, Trina Middleton, a 14-year-old girl, was walking home with 2 friends after a football game in East Cleveland, Ohio. It was a normal Friday evening, no different from any other Friday for a teenage girl. But Trina's life ended right there, and her death opened one of the most controversial death penalty cases in American judicial history. Romell Broom, 28, abducted, raped, and murdered Trina Middleton. 3 days earlier, Broom had made a failed abduction attempt on 12-year-old Vanita McKinney. 2 neighbors intervened, and he fled. But remember this detail: that failure triggered a rage in Broom, and it would reappear in his testimony. Comment below how many years you think Romell Broom actually spent on death row before he died. The answer might surprise you regarding the slowness of the American justice system. But to understand why this case became so special, we need to go back to 1984, when 2 fates of Trina Middleton and Romell Broom intersected on one fateful night. Trina Middleton was born on June 15, 1970, in Cleveland, Ohio. She was the daughter of a working-class black family. In 1984, at 14, she was a sophomore in high school in East Cleveland. Trina was a lively girl who loved extracurricular activities, especially sports. She regularly attended her school's football games, which is why she was there on the evening of September 21st. At the same time, Romell Broom, born on June 4, 1956 in Muskegon, Michigan, was experiencing a brief period of freedom after being paroled. He was 28 years old and already had a long criminal record with charges of rape and armed robbery. In 1984, he lived with his mother in Ohio, but life's stresses pushed him down the path of crime. As Trina was preparing for the new school year, dreaming of the future, Broom was quietly planning his next crimes. These two parallel life paths intersected at a fateful crossroad in East Cleveland. Notably, during the same period, Trina was involved in community activities at her local church, while Broom was secretly stalking young girls in the area. Both were black individuals living in the same neighborhood, but with completely opposite life trajectories. But there was one detail about Trina Middleton that not even her family knew she had written in her diary about her worries after noticing a strange car appearing multiple times near her school. This diary later became crucial evidence in the trial. Romell Broom's path to crime. Romell Broom was born in Muskegon, Michigan, and moved to Ohio with his mother when he was just 5 years old. The absence of a father figure left deep psychological scars on the young boy. Broom's childhood was marked by instability and early antisocial behaviors. As a juvenile, Broom committed several nonviolent crimes, leading to multiple referrals to the Ohio Youth Commission. This was the first stage of a criminal pattern that would escalate in severity. On October 25, 1974, at age 18, Broom and an accomplice broke into a man's car, robbed him at gunpoint, and forced him out of the vehicle. This was the first time he used force in a crime. Just 2 months later, on January 11, 1975, Broom committed his first serious crime, the rape of a 12-year-old girl who was babysitting. This was a clear sign of his tendency toward sexual crimes against children. According to criminal psychologists, this pattern indicates that Broom was an escalating offender, a criminal whose crimes tend to increase in severity over time. From property crimes, he moved to armed robbery, then rape, and finally murder. On March 15, 1975, Broom committed another armed robbery with an accomplice. He later pleaded guilty to rape, armed robbery, and grand larceny, and was sentenced to 7 to 25 years in prison. Notably, his accomplice was acquitted, suggesting Broom was the ringleader. A visual timeline of his escalation shows: 1974, armed robbery; 1975, child rape; 1975, continued armed robbery; 1984, paroled; 1984, murder. The 9 years in prison did not treat his criminal tendencies. It may have even increased his resentment. The crime and investigation. On the evening of September 21, 1984, for Trina Middleton, it was just a normal Friday night. She had just finished cheering for her school's team in an important game. Along with 2 friends, she decided to walk home instead of waiting for the bus. The route home was through a relatively deserted area, but it was a path she had taken hundreds of times. Trina felt safe with her friends, completely unaware she was being watched. Romell Broom had been quietly observing this area for days. After failing to abduct Vanita McKinney 3 days earlier, he had become more careful, but also more aggressive. He drove his car waiting for the right opportunity. When he saw the 3 young girls on the deserted road, he knew it was time to act. From the perspective of witnesses, a couple walking on the opposite side of the street saw a car stop near the 3 girls. They saw a scuffle, but were too far away to intervene in time. The husband later testified that he saw a man pull one of the girls into the car while the other 2 ran away screaming for help. For the Middleton family, when Trina didn't come home at the usual time, they initially thought she was at a friend's house. But when they called and learned her 2 friends were home safely but hadn't seen Trina, they began to worry. Trina's mother called the police that night, but according to regulations, the police had to wait 24 hours before opening a missing person investigation. Broom took Trina to a secluded area where he committed the horrific crime. According to later testimony, he raped her before murdering her. She tried to cry for help and fight back, but the strength of a 14-year-old was no match for a grown man. The investigation began in earnest on the morning of September 22, 1984, when Trina Middleton's body was found in a deserted area about 5 miles from where she disappeared. Police immediately sealed off the scene and began collecting evidence. Forensic experts used the most advanced technology available in 1984, including wound analysis, preliminary DNA testing, and examination of fibers and hair found on the victim's body. Although DNA technology was not as developed as it is today, investigators collected enough samples for later comparison. Every piece of evidence played a crucial role in building the overall picture. The wounds on Trina's body proved she had been raped and murdered. Traces under her fingernails showed she had tried to fight back. Fibers from the perpetrator's shirt found on the victim's clothing would become key evidence for matching with a suspect. But investigators didn't know that just 3 days earlier, Broom had made a failed abduction attempt on Venita McKinney. This information was only discovered after Broom was arrested and other victims began to speak out. This completely changed the direction of the investigation from an isolated case to a systematic pattern of crime. The trial and confessions. After committing the crime against Trina Middleton, Romell Broom did not try to flee far. Instead, he continued to live a normal life in the community as if nothing had happened. This is a characteristic of many serial criminals, the ability to maintain a normal facade while harboring serious criminal behaviors. A route map shows Broom moved within a relatively small geographical area, from East Cleveland, where he abducted Trina, to the deserted area where he committed the crime, and then back to his mother's house. The entire process took place within a radius of less than 10 miles, showing his familiarity with the terrain. Broom's life during his freedom was marked by increasing tension and escalating violent behaviors. He lived with his mother, but their relationship became more and more strained. Neighbors later recounted that they had noticed a change in Broom's behavior. He became withdrawn and exhibited suspicious gestures. There were 3 times Broom was nearly caught before he was actually arrested. The first was when he tried to abduct Venita McKinney, but was stopped by residents. The second was when a police officer stopped his car for a traffic violation, but did not realize he was a suspect. And the third was when he was almost identified by another witness before committing a crime against Melinda Grissom. The trial of Romell Broom took place in a tense atmosphere and was closely followed by the public. The courtroom became a battleground between justice and crime, where Broom's fate was decided. The jury of 12 people had to face the brutal evidence of the crimes Broom had committed. The prosecution built a solid case based on physical evidence, witness testimony, and Broom's criminal history. Their strategy was to prove that Broom was not only guilty of Trina Middleton's murder, but also demonstrated a dangerous criminal pattern that needed to be stopped with the death penalty. The defense lawyers tried to argue for mitigating factors based on Broom's difficult childhood mental health issues and other elements. They proposed a plea deal for a life sentence instead of death. Broom offered to plead guilty in exchange for a sentence of 30 years to life, but this offer was rejected by the court. The reason was the severity of the crime and the high risk of reoffending, leading the court to believe that only the death penalty would be sufficient to protect society. Ultimately, the jury found Broom guilty and sentenced him to death. After his arrest, Romell Broom gave inconsistent confessions and frequently changed his story. His letters and statements revealed a complex picture of a killer's psychology, while also raising questions about the reliability of these confessions. In some confessions, Broom admitted to killing Trina Middleton, but tried to blame external factors like alcohol, drugs, or psychological pressure. He described the details of the crime, but these descriptions frequently changed and contradicted each other. Forensic linguistic analysis of these confessions shows that Broom used language to evade responsibility. He often used phrases like, "it happened," instead of, "I did it," indicating a refusal to accept full responsibility. This is a typical trait of psychopathic criminals. When comparing the timeline of his confessions with the physical evidence, there were many inconsistencies. For example, Broom claimed the crime occurred at a different time than what the forensic evidence proved. He also changed his story about the location and method of the crime multiple times. In 2003, Broom accepted an offer from the state of Ohio for DNA testing to prove his innocence. However, the test results not only failed to prove him innocent, but also strengthened the evidence of his guilt. The clemency hearing concluded that the DNA report did not show an exact match to anyone else, meaning the possibility of another person committing the crime was extremely low. The failed execution and aftermath. On September 14, 2009, 24 hours before his execution, Romell Broom spent his final moments in a way few could imagine. He met with a chaplain, made a final phone call to his family, and completed the last legal procedures. His mood was described by prison staff as relatively calm, but showing signs of anxiety. Broom refused a last meal, which is quite rare in death penalty cases. He said he was not in the mood to eat and only drank some water. Refusing a last meal is often interpreted as a sign of accepting one's fate or a final form of protest. At 2:00 p.m. on September 15, 2009, Broom was taken to the execution chamber at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility. The chamber was described as a small, sterile room with a medical gurney in the center and a witness area behind a glass pane. Present were representatives of the victim's family lawyers and members of the press. When asked for his last words, Broom said, "I'm sorry to the Middleton family. I know an apology can't erase the pain, but I am truly sorry for what happened. I hope they can find peace." These words were perceived as seemingly sincere, but could also have been a final attempt to create a positive image. The execution process began at 2:15 p.m. Medical staff attempted to insert an IV line to administer the lethal drugs. However, the unexpected happened. They could not find a suitable vein. For 2 hours, Broom had to lie on the execution gurney while doctors tried to find a usable vein. At 4:15 p.m., after 2 hours of failure, Ohio Governor Ted Strickland issued a 1-week stay of execution. Broom was returned to death row, becoming the first person in American history to survive a failed execution. The immediate reaction from the victim's family was deep disappointment, while the legal community began to debate the legality of a second execution attempt. With the death of Romell Broom from COVID-19 on December 28, 2020, this chapter closed unexpectedly, leaving behind unresolved legal questions and the still present pain of the victim's family. Romell Broom's failed execution created an unprecedented legal precedent in the American justice system. The question raised was, is attempting to execute a person a second time after the first attempt failed a cruel and unusual punishment under the Eighth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution? Broom's lawyers argued that the first execution attempt caused irreparable psychological and physical trauma, and trying again would violate the principle of double jeopardy, not being tried twice for the same crime. They also argued that evidence from the failed execution would be irretrievably lost if a second attempt were made. Amnesty International launched a global campaign using Broom's case to criticize the American death penalty system. They argued that this case proved that capital punishment is inherently cruel and inhumane. In March 2016, the Ohio Supreme Court rejected the appeal and ruled that the state could try to execute Broom a second time. However, in August 2016, his lawyers appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, arguing that it would violate the Fifth and 14th Amendments. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear the case in December 2016, paving the way for a second execution. The execution date was set for June 17, 2020, but the COVID-19 pandemic changed everything. On April 14, 2020, the execution was postponed to March 16, 2022. However, fate had other plans. On December 28, 2020, Romell Broom died from complications of COVID-19 at the Franklin Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio, at the age of 64. His death brought an end to one of the most controversial death penalty cases in American legal history. Legacy and unanswered questions. The family of Trina Middleton still lives with the pain of their loss after nearly 40 years. Trina's mother passed away in 2018, never seeing justice truly served. The remaining members of the Middleton family expressed a feeling of being robbed of closure when Broom died of illness instead of being executed. The Romell Broom case led to significant changes in execution procedures in Ohio and many other states. New regulations were enacted requiring more thorough medical examinations before executions, and time limits for finding a vein were clearly defined to avoid similar situations. This case has also become the subject of many legal studies and is taught in law schools as a case study on the complexities of the criminal justice system. The documentary The Second Execution of Romell Broom by director Michael Verhoeven chronicled the entire legal process and the social impact of the case. Broom also wrote an e-book, Survivor on Death Row, in which he shared his experience during his 25 years awaiting execution. This book has become an important document for those seeking to understand the psychology of a death row inmate. Although Broom is dead, there are still unanswered questions in this case. In 2003, a woman named Vicky Varner claimed that Broom had raped and threatened to kill her in 1975 when she was only 13. This incident was never fully investigated, and with Broom's death, the possibility of finding the truth has become slim. If you have any information related to the unsolved cases of Romell Broom, or if you are a victim of a similar crime, please contact your local police or a crime victim support hotline. The Romell Broom case is not just a story about a criminal and a victim, but also a story about the flaws in the justice system, the complexity of justice, and the price paid for unforgivable crimes. It is a reminder that behind every case are real people with real pain and justice. Sometimes comes late or never arrives completely. Thank you for following the story of Romell Broom. Please remember that all information in this video has been carefully researched from reliable sources, and we always respect the memory of the victims and their families. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss other true crime stories. See you in the next video.